I am 32-year-old Ramona Adair, and according to my family, I am the cautionary tale they tell at Thanksgiving. The daughter who threw it all away. What they don't know, what none of them have ever known, is that the quiet woman they pity at the end of the table holds a security clearance higher than most senators. And the phone buzzing silently against my thigh right now could reroute a satellite. But tonight, I'm just sitting here in my mother's dining room in Annapolis, cutting my roast beef into small pieces while my brother gets a standing ovation for making partner at his law firm. My name is Ramona, but everyone in the Adair family calls me Mona. They say it soft, almost like an afterthought, the way you'd call a dog that wandered into the wrong room. Mona, sit up straight. Mona, why can't you be more like your brother? Mona, we just want what's best for you. Have you ever sat in a room full of people who share your blood and felt like a stranger? If you know that feeling, that specific hollowness of being surrounded and completely alone, stay with me. Because this invisible woman is about to walk into a room that will change everything. The Adair family dinners happened every Sunday at 6 sharp, no exceptions. My mother, Catherine, ran them with the precision of a 4-star general. Starched tablecloth, the good china, the set with the tiny gold laurel leaves she inherited from her mother. Candles lit at 5:55. Wine poured at 6:01. The house itself was a sprawling colonial on the Severn River. All white columns and manicured boxwood hedges, bought with generations of Navy money and maintained with an almost religious devotion to appearances. My father, Rear Admiral Douglas Adair, retired, sat at the head of the table the way he sat at the head of everything, like the chair had been built specifically around him. He was a big man with a deep voice and hands that could crack walnuts, and he had exactly one way of looking at me, which was through me, as if I were a window he was trying to see past. My brother Landon's name was already used. Let me pick another. My brother Bennett sat across from me, tanned from a recent golf trip to Hilton Head, his wife Celeste beside him with her tasteful pearl earrings and her tasteful laugh. Bennett was 3 years older and had done every single thing right. Annapolis. Jag Corp, top-tier DC law firm. He had the jawline, the career, the waterfront townhouse in Old Town Alexandria, and as of tonight, he had something else. My father stood up at the head of the table, his chair scraping back against the hardwood. He reached into his breast pocket and produced a small wooden box, polished dark walnut, that I recognized immediately. My chest tightened. Inside that box was my grandfather's Naval Academy class ring, the one Rear Admiral Thomas Adair wore the day he walked across the stage at Bancroft Hall in 1952. It was the single most sacred object in our family. More than jewelry, more than inheritance. It was a verdict. My father opened the box and held it out to Bennett. "You've earned this, son," he said, his voice thick with emotion I'd never once heard directed at me. "You carry the Adair name the way it was meant to be carried." Bennett slid the ring onto his finger and held up his hand, the gold catching the candlelight. Celeste squeezed his arm. My mother pressed a napkin into the corner of her eye. And my father, the Admiral, finally looked at me, not through me, at me. His expression was something between pity and finality. "This ring goes to someone who's built something, Mona," he said quietly. "You understand." I understood perfectly. I understood that I had been tried, convicted, and sentenced at a Sunday dinner, between the roast beef and the lemon tart. The ruling was final. Mona Adair, age 32, was officially not enough. I excused myself before dessert. I said I needed air. Nobody tried to stop me. I walked out through the back door, past my mother's rose garden, down to the dock where my father's sailboat creaked in the November wind. The Chesapeake Bay was black and flat, and the air smelled of salt and dead leaves. I stood there, my hands shaking. Not from the cold, but from the sheer physical effort of not screaming. Then the device in my coat pocket vibrated. Not my iPhone, the other one. The one that looked like a matte black credit card and connected to a network that didn't officially exist. I pulled it out. A single line of encrypted text glowed on the screen. 2 words and a set of coordinates. Cardinal. Active. I closed my eyes for 1 second. Then I reached into the hidden pocket of my wallet, the one sewn behind my driver's license, and pulled out a small titanium signet ring. Matte black, engraved with a raptor in flight, the emblem of the division. I pressed my thumb against its face. The device chimed softly. Green light. Authenticated. Director Ramona Adair. Confirmed. I looked back through the kitchen window. My family was laughing, admiring the ring on Bennett's hand, basking in the warm glow of their carefully curated world. They thought they knew me. They thought my story was small. A real smile touched my lips for the first time all evening. The drive back to my apartment in Crystal City took 40 minutes. The sapphire waters of the Chesapeake gave way to the stark geometry of the Beltway, headlights streaming past like tracer rounds in the dark. My apartment was a 1-bedroom on the 14th floor of a glass tower, chosen not for the view but for the sight lines and the building's proximity to 3 separate metro lines. Inside, it looked like nobody really lived there. Beige walls, a gray couch, a kitchen counter with exactly 1 mug and 1 plate drying on a rack. There were no photographs, no throw pillows, no sign that a human heart beat within these walls. It was a station, not a home. My exit from the Naval Academy wasn't what they thought. None of it was. I was 19, a plebe at Annapolis, struggling not because I couldn't hack it, but because I was too good at the wrong things. I could break a cipher faster than any upperclassman in the signals intelligence elective. I could read a satellite photograph and identify a missile battery camouflaged under agricultural netting. What I could not do was play the political games, the handshakes and the hair flips, and the unspoken rules about whose daughter you needed to befriend. In my second year, a man I knew only as Mr. Aldrich called me into an unmarked office in Rickover Hall. He was slim, silver-haired, spoke softly, and had eyes that cataloged everything. He told me he ran a division so classified that its budget didn't appear on any congressional ledger. He told me that my father, the admiral, was a fine officer who followed orders well. Then he told me that I was something else entirely. He said I was the kind of mind that didn't follow orders. It created them. He offered me a choice: stay at the academy, graduate, serve honorably, and spend my career in my father's long shadow, or leave, disappear into a world where the real wars were fought, not on aircraft carriers but in server rooms and safe houses, and the satellites between encrypted transmissions. I chose the silence. My family was told I had washed out, couldn't handle the pressure. My father didn't speak to me for 4 months. He would sit at breakfast reading the Washington Post, his jaw locked, his coffee going cold, and I would sit across from him, invisible. My mother processed her grief publicly, calling her friends at the Officers' Wives Club to lament that her daughter had crumbled. She just doesn't have the constitution. I heard her tell Mrs. Braddock on the phone. Some people aren't built for it. She wasn't wrong. I wasn't built for parades and promotions. I was built for something she couldn't imagine. The real blow came when I was 23. I had come home for Christmas, the last one I would try to make normal. I was in my father's study, looking for a pen to sign a card, when I found the document. It was from Whitaker, Fenn, and Crowley, the estate attorneys on Maryland Avenue, who had handled the Adair family trust for 60 years. I shouldn't have read it, but I did. My name had been moved from the primary beneficiary list to a conditional appendix. The conditions were vague enough to be unachievable. Demonstration of personal and professional stability, consistent with the values of the Adair family. Translation: become the person we want you to be, or get nothing. I had been legally demoted from daughter to footnote. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked. Each tick sounded like a door closing. I drove back to Crystal City that night and didn't go home for 2 years. Mr. Aldrich became the closest thing I had to a father. He never pitied me. He never praised me unless it was earned, and he never pretended the work would be anything other than brutal. The day before my first deep cover operation, he called me into his office. It was a small, wood-paneled room that smelled of old paper and strong tea. He opened a drawer and pulled out the black titanium ring. "Your family has their symbols," he said, turning the ring in his fingers. "Their class rings and their ceremony. That's one kind of legacy. It looks good in photographs." He placed the ring in my palm. The metal was warm. "This is a different kind. This one doesn't get photographed. It doesn't get displayed on a mantelpiece. It represents the things you do when no one is watching, the threats you stop before they become headlines, the lives saved by people who will never know your name." He looked at me, and for one moment his eyes were almost kind. "Douglas sees a daughter who quit. I see the most dangerous analyst I've ever trained. Don't confuse his judgment for the truth." I carried those words like armor for the next 9 years. My life became a performance. 2 performances, actually, running on parallel tracks that could never cross. From 9 to 5, I was Mona Adair, a GS-12 data analyst at the Department of Homeland Security. I sat in a fluorescent-lit cubicle in a building on Nebraska Avenue, surrounded by government-issue furniture and coworkers who knew me as pleasant, quiet, and forgettable. I attended meetings about port security metrics. I ate lunch at my desk, usually a sad container of Greek yogurt and an apple. I was the kind of person you'd sit next to on the metro and immediately forget. But at night, behind 3 locked doors and a biometric scanner, I became cardinal. My apartment transformed. The second bedroom, the one I told maintenance was used for storage, held 3 encrypted terminals, a secure satellite uplink, and a wall of monitors that tracked operations across 11 time zones. I ran assets in places most Americans couldn't find on a map. I decoded communications that had been bouncing between adversarial governments for months. I made decisions that affected thousands of lives, and I made them alone, in the blue glow of a screen, eating cold leftover pad thai from a container, because I'd forgotten to eat since morning. Sleep came in fragments, 2 hours here, 90 minutes there, interrupted by alerts that carried the weight of someone else's survival. Some nights, the loneliness was a physical thing, a pressure in my chest that no amount of deep breathing could relieve. On those nights, I'd drive, not anywhere specific, just south on Route 1, away from the district, into the quiet dark of Virginia. I always ended up at the same place, a 24-hour diner called the Blue Lantern, tucked behind a gas station off Route 17 near Fredericksburg. It was the kind of place with cracked vinyl booths and a jukebox that still played Patsy Cline. The night waitress was a woman named Ruthie, mid-60s, with reading glasses on a beaded chain and a voice like warm gravel. She never asked me why I was there at 1 in the morning on a Tuesday. She never asked what I did. She just brought me a cup of black coffee and a short stack of buttermilk pancakes and said, "You look like you could use these, sweetheart." That was it. No judgment, no agenda. Just a tired woman feeding another tired woman in the middle of the night. In that diner, surrounded by truck drivers and shift workers and the faint smell of bacon grease, I wasn't cardinal. I wasn't the disappointing Adair daughter. I was just Mona, eating pancakes, feeling human for 20 minutes. One night, back at my apartment, reviewing intelligence on a network we'd been tracking for months, I felt the familiar sharp ache in my left hip. A souvenir from an operation in a country I'm not allowed to name. A piece of shrapnel that the surgeons decided was safer to leave in than to remove. I pressed my hand against it and wondered, not for the first time, whether the trade had been worth it. I had given up a family. I had given up the possibility of a normal life, the kind with a front porch and a dog and someone who knew my real name. I had traded all of it for a life of shadows. The apartment was silent except for the hum of the servers. The question hung in the dark like smoke. 6 months before the night that changed everything, I got a phone call from a man named Victor Sable. Sable was a ghost, a former intelligence operative who'd gone rogue 10 years earlier, and had been selling classified American defense technology to the highest bidder ever since. He was responsible for the ambush that killed Mr. Aldrich during an operation in Eastern Europe 3 years ago. A mission I had planned, a mission I still dreamed about. Sable didn't call to threaten me. He called to gloat. "I hear you're still filing paperwork at Homeland Security," he said, his accent smooth, almost amused. Such a waste. The line went dead. 3 weeks later, my mother called. Her voice was the honeyed, careful tone she used at charity luncheons, the voice that meant she wanted something. "Mona, darling, your father and I would love to take you to dinner, just the 3 of us. The Inn at Perry Cabin on the Eastern Shore. A nice family evening." The Inn at Perry Cabin. I knew that restaurant. It was where my parents went when they had something official to say. It was where they'd announced Bennett's engagement. It was where they'd told me, over a plate of crab imperial, that they were reducing my college fund after I changed my major from international relations to computer science. Nothing good ever happened at the Inn at Perry Cabin. But some broken, stubborn part of me, the part that still flinched when my father looked through me, that part whispered, maybe this time it'll be different. Maybe they're finally ready to see me. I wore a simple black dress, professional, understated, armor that looked like clothing. The restaurant was all exposed brick and white linen and soft candlelight reflecting off the Miles River. My parents were already seated. My mother's smile was brilliant and practiced. My father stood and offered me a hug that lasted exactly 2 seconds, the duration of a man fulfilling a social obligation. The first hour was a master class in manipulation. They asked about my work. They reminisced about a vacation to Cape May when I was 8, a memory so carefully edited it might as well have been fiction. They ordered an expensive bottle of Pinot Noir and insisted I have a glass. They were performing the role of loving parents, and the performance was flawless. Then the dessert plates were cleared, and my father's face changed. The warmth drained out of it like water from a sink. "Mona," he said, leaning forward, his fingers steepled. "There's something we need to discuss." He told me about an old Navy friend, a man named Clive Murdoch, who ran a defense technology company called Meridian Systems. Murdoch's company was competing for a major federal cybersecurity contract, and there were complications. My father spoke carefully, but the message was clear. He wanted me to use my position at DHS to access internal evaluation documents, provide advance intelligence on competing bids, and put in a favorable word with the right officials. "You're in a position to hear things, Mona," he said, his eyes locked on mine. "This would mean a great deal to Clive and to this family. It's time you started contributing." Contributing. As if a decade of silent service to the country meant nothing because it came without a uniform and a pension. I set my fork down on the white tablecloth. The tiny click was the loudest sound in the room. I looked into my father's eyes, and for the first time in my life, I spoke to him not as his daughter, but as who I actually was. "What you're describing is a federal crime," I said, my voice so calm it surprised even me. "Allied disclosure of procurement-sensitive information. It carries up to 10 years. I paused, then dropped the second bomb. "And your friend Mr. Murdoch might want to be more careful about his business partners. Meridian Systems has been flagged in a federal investigation for its financial relationship with a man named Victor Sable." The color left my father's face so fast I thought he might pass out. My mother's smile cracked like porcelain. They knew the name, they knew, and they had asked me anyway. The last ember of hope I'd carried into that restaurant turned to ash. They hadn't invited me to reconnect. They'd invited me to use me. And they'd done it knowing that the man they were helping had connections to the person who killed my mentor. I folded my napkin, placed it on the table, and left without another word. 3 days later, I was called into my supervisor's office at DHS. A man named Mr. Ellsworth, bland and bureaucratic, who avoided my eyes as he slid a printed email across his desk. It was an anonymous tip, sent from a public terminal at the Army-Navy Country Club in Arlington, my father's club. The email described me as psychologically unstable, citing my failure to complete the Naval Academy and questioning whether I should have access to sensitive government systems. It was a character assassination dressed up as civic concern. My father hadn't just been angry. He had tried to destroy the only career he thought I had. I drove straight to Bennett's apartment in Alexandria. He opened the door in athletic shorts, a protein shake in his hand. His surprise turned to annoyance when I held up the email. He glanced at it, and for 1 second, guilt flickered across his face before the Adair defensiveness slammed down like a blast door. "He's our father, Mona. You embarrassed him. I refuse to commit a felony for him, Bennett. You always have to make everything so dramatic," he said, his jaw tight. "Dad was trying to include you. He was giving you a chance to be useful, and you threw it into his face. What did you expect?" I looked at my brother, this golden boy, this man who had gotten every advantage, every inheritance, every ounce of parental love that should have been divided equally, and I saw it clearly for the first time. He didn't see a sister. He saw a supporting character in his story, someone who existed to make his light brighter by comparison. "Where are you going?" he called as I turned toward the elevator. "To be useful," I said without looking back. I drove to Crystal City, locked my 3 locks, sat down at my encrypted terminal, and became cardinal for the last time as a woman driven by grief. This time, I was driven by something colder and more precise. I opened a secure channel to the one person I trusted absolutely. Sergeant Major Isaiah Voss, 61 years old, built like a bridge abutment, with a voice like a diesel engine at low idle. Voss had been Mr. Aldrich's right hand for 20 years. He was the only person alive who knew both my identities. When Aldrich died, Voss became my anchor, my counsel, my surrogate father, though neither of us would ever say that word out loud. He appeared on my secure screen within seconds. His face was all business. "Cardinal, talk to me." I told him everything. The dinner, the request, the email, Murdoch and Sable. Voss listened without interrupting. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking. He was quiet for a long moment, which with Voss meant he was thinking 3 moves ahead. "Your father just handed you the thread," he said finally. "If Murdoch is connected to Sable, and your father is connected to Murdoch, then Sable has a direct pipeline into the family of a retired flag officer. That's not just corruption, that's a counterintelligence threat." "I know," I said. "So what's your play?" I told him about the honeypot. We would build a decoy server, seed it with convincing but fake weapon system data, and create a digital trail that appeared to originate from DHS. We would make it look like a vulnerability, a crack in the wall that a skilled operative could exploit, and then we would wait for Sable to walk through it. The key, I explained, was Bennett. 3 months earlier, he had used his law firm credentials to run a background search on me, probably at our father's request, and in doing so had pinged a peripheral Homeland Security database. It was harmless, but it left a digital fingerprint. Sable, if he was monitoring the Adair family as I suspected, would see that fingerprint and interpret it as a weak point. "We're not setting a trap for a hacker," I said. "We're baiting Sable's ego. He'll think he's exploiting my idiot brother to get to me." Voss almost smiled. "Almost. Who do you need inside the Pentagon?" "Commander Alina Restrepo, Internal Security Division." Restrepo was sharp, skeptical, and had never liked my methods. But she was incorruptible, and right now, that mattered more than anything. I placed the call. Restrepo's face appeared on screen, unreadable as always. I laid out the entire operation, every detail, including my family's involvement. It was a calculated risk, exposing the Adair dysfunction to a woman who could end my career with a single memo. But transparency was the only currency she'd accept. When I finished, Restrepo was silent for 10 seconds. Then she said, "You're using your own family's betrayal as operational bait." "Yes." A thin smile crossed her lips. I had never seen her smile before. That's either brilliant or insane. I'm in. The trap took 48 hours to build and 72 more to spring. Voss and I worked around the clock in a secure facility in the Blue Ridge Mountains, a place called Ridgeline, hidden in a valley that didn't appear on any commercial map. Our analysts, a young prodigy named Patel and a veteran named Santiago, built the honeypot with surgical precision. We seeded it with data that looked classified, defense drone schematics that were actually 3 generations obsolete but convincingly formatted. We left exactly one apparent vulnerability linked to the digital footprint Bennett had left. Then we waited. Sable took the bait on a Tuesday night. Believing he had penetrated a secure DHS server, he initiated a full data transfer. What he actually did was download a Trojan horse that gave us total access to his entire network. Every file, every message, every dollar. We watched in real time as his world opened up like a cracked safe. The next morning, I found myself in a place I had spent my life trying to avoid, a secure hearing room in the Pentagon. The room was windowless, climate-controlled, and humming with tension. Around a polished conference table sat a 2-star general, a deputy director from the NSA, and several other senior officials whose names I will never be able to share. And at the far end of the table, seated side by side, were my father and my brother. My father was there as a senior advisor, a respected voice in defense circles. Bennett was there as outside legal counsel for Meridian Systems, the very company at the center of the investigation. And I was there as a low-level DHS analyst, the designated scapegoat, the weak link they were all prepared to sacrifice. Victor Sable was brought in last, not as a suspect, but as a security consultant who had supposedly uncovered a data breach. He walked in wearing a tailored charcoal suit, all confidence and easy handshakes. He nodded at the generals, shook my brother's hand, and glanced at me with the kind of condescending half-smile you give a child who's wandered into an adult conversation. His presentation was polished. He used data visualizations and network diagrams to weave a story of catastrophic security failure, a breach he traced to a specific user's credentials within DHS. He never said my name. He didn't have to. Every eye in the room turned to me. I could feel the weight of their judgment, silent and absolute. My father looked at me with cold finality. This was the moment he had been waiting for, the official confirmation that his disappointing daughter was exactly what he'd always believed, a failure. Bennett's expression was carefully neutral, but I could see the satisfaction behind his eyes. The narrative was perfect. The black sheep was about to be slaughtered. In conclusion, Sable said, turning to the panel, this breach represents a critical failure. The individual responsible must be identified immediately. The 2-star general cleared his throat, but before he could speak, Commander Alina Restrepo, who had been sitting silently in the corner for the entire proceeding, stood up. General, she said, her voice slicing through the room, before we proceed, I believe we should hear from the person with the highest operational authority on asymmetric threats in this room. Confused silence. The general looked around the table. And who would that be, Commander? Restrepo turned and looked directly at me. Her voice was clear and carried the precision of a scalpel. Director Cardinal, perhaps you could clarify the situation for us. Time stopped. Every head in the room turned. I heard the sound of my father's breath catching, a small, sharp intake that seemed to echo off the concrete walls. I watched his face transform in real time, the cold dismissal crumbling into shock, then confusion, then something I had never seen in his eyes before. Fear. His mouth opened slightly. No words came. Beside him, Bennett went white. The blood drained from his face so completely. He looked like a man who'd been struck. His hand, the one wearing our grandfather's ring, gripped the edge of the table. Across the room, Isaiah Voss stood against the back wall, arms crossed, and the corner of his mouth twitched with the faintest suggestion of a smile. I rose from my chair. Slowly, the Mausy's Mona they had come to judge ceased to exist. In her place stood Cardinal, director of a division they didn't even know existed. "Thank you, Commander Restrepo," I said, and my voice was calm, unhurried, and carried an authority that shut down every murmur in the room. "Mr. Sable is correct about one thing. There was a breach. But it wasn't a breach of our systems. It was a breach into his." I nodded to Voss, who tapped his tablet. The main screen behind me changed. Sable's presentation vanished, replaced by a live feed of his own network. "The data Mr. Sable is so proud of obtaining," I continued, "was a honeypot, a fabricated server designed and deployed by my division specifically to draw him out. For the past 72 hours, every keystroke he has made, every encrypted message he has sent, every dollar he has moved has been captured by a surveillance package he downloaded onto his own system." The screen split. Offshore accounts in the Caymans. Wire transfers to shell companies in Cyprus. Encrypted emails between Sable and Clive Murdoch discussing their plan to leverage my father's connections. Everything laid bare, projected 10 feet tall in a room full of generals. "Mr. Sable was not uncovering a threat," I said, turning to face him directly. "He was the threat, and he has just delivered his entire criminal enterprise to us on a silver platter." The doors at the back of the room opened. 2 agents in dark suits and FBI windbreakers walked in. They went directly to Sable, whose face had gone the color of wet concrete. "Victor Sable, you are under arrest for conspiracy, espionage, and multiple violations of the Espionage Act." The handcuffs clicked. The room was silent. No one moved. The hearing was adjourned. The officials filed out, some offering me stiff nods of new respect. When the heavy door closed behind the last of them, I was alone with my family. The wreckage of every Sunday dinner, every dismissive glance, every clause in that amended trust, it all hung in the air between us. My father found his voice first. The shock had curdled into rage, the reflexive fury of a man whose authority has been publicly shattered. He followed me toward the door, his footsteps sharp on the polished floor. "What have you done, Ramona?" He used my full name, a weapon he saved for his worst moments. "You've humiliated this family. You've dragged the Adair name through the mud in front of people I've served with for decades." I turned to face him, and for the first time in 32 years, I felt nothing. No fear, no need, no longing for his approval. The decade of silence and suffering had burned all of it away. "The Adair name," I said quietly, my voice colder than his had ever been. "Let me tell you about the Adair name, Dad. Is family honor in pressuring your daughter to commit a federal crime? Is it in writing her out of your will because she chose a path you couldn't control? Is it in sending an anonymous email to destroy her career because she had the spine to say no? Because if that's the Adair legacy, then you're right. I don't deserve it. I deserve better." He had no answer. The truth, spoken plainly, left him speechless. Bennett stepped forward, his face streaked, his composure shattered. "Mona, I swear, I didn't know the full extent of it. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." I looked at his outstretched hand and did not take it. "You didn't know," I said flatly. "Or you didn't want to know. Your whole life, you needed me to be the failure. You needed my silence so your noise could sound like achievement. You weren't my brother, Bennett. You were my replacement." He flinched. His hand dropped. He had nothing to say because we both knew every word was true. I pulled the black titanium ring from my finger and held it in my palm. The metal caught the fluorescent light. "You were right about one thing, Dad," I said. "Grandfather's ring isn't for me. I don't belong to your world anymore. I never really did." I walked out of the Pentagon hearing room and did not look back. The months that followed were quiet in the way that aftermath is always quiet. Sable's network was dismantled. Clive Murdoch was indicted. My father resigned from every advisory board he sat on. The Adair name, once a shield, became a cautionary tale in defense circles. I heard all of this through channels. I felt nothing about it, no satisfaction, no pity, just a vast, clean distance. In the spring, a small private ceremony was held at Arlington National Cemetery for Mr. Aldrich. No press, no politicians, just a handful of us from the division, standing among the white headstones on a gray morning, while the wind carried the sound of taps from another funeral across the hill. I placed a single white carnation at his grave. Voss stood beside me, his hand on my shoulder, heavy and steady and real. Looking at the small group gathered there, Restrepo, Patel, Santiago, a few others whose names the world will never know, I realized I wasn't alone. These people were my family, not by blood, but by choice, forged in secrets and silence and the shared weight of work that mattered. A few weeks later, a letter arrived at my apartment. Cream-colored envelope, heavy stationery, Bennett's handwriting. I almost threw it away, but something, maybe curiosity, maybe the last fraying thread of connection, made me open it. It was short. He wrote that he had returned grandfather's ring to our mother. He had resigned from his firm and accepted a position with a legal aid organization in Bozeman, Montana, about as far from Annapolis and the Adair orbit as the continental United States allowed. The letter ended with 4 sentences that I read 3 times. "You were right about everything, Mona. I spent my whole life standing in a spotlight you didn't want, and I told myself that made me better. It didn't. I hope you find what you're looking for." It wasn't an apology exactly. It was an admission, a white flag, a goodbye. I folded the letter and put it in a drawer. I felt sadness and relief in equal measure, braided together so tightly I couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. That summer, I bought a small cabin in the Blue Ridge Mountains. Stone chimney, wide porch, tin roof that rang when it rained. It was the first place that ever felt like mine. One morning in early October, I stood on that porch with a ceramic mug of black coffee, watching fog lift from the valley below. The air smelled of pine and wood smoke, and the faint sweetness of fallen apples from a neighbor's orchard. The black titanium ring was back on my finger. It felt different now, not a burden, not a secret, just a quiet part of who I was. I wasn't the broken Mona desperate for approval anymore. I wasn't Cardinal, running on adrenaline and buried grief. I was just Ramona Adair, a woman who had walked through fire and come out the other side, carrying something her father's legacy could never give her: peace. My legacy wouldn't be carved into a headstone or displayed in a glass cases at the Naval Academy. It existed in the operations I ran, the threats I stopped before they became headlines, the lives that were safe because of work done in the dark by people who would never be thanked. It was invisible and it was real. The sun climbed above the ridge, flooding the valley with gold. The ghosts were quiet, not gone, never gone, but finally still. And for the first time in as long as I could remember, I looked at the future not as something to survive, but as something to build. If any part of my story touched something in you, if you've ever found your own quiet strength after being told you weren't enough, I'd be honored if you'd leave a blue heart in the comments. Please like this video and subscribe to the channel. There are more stories of silent resilience to tell, and I want to share them with you.